and welcome to another Sagely Health webinar. I'm here today with Dr. Jason Sager, as always. Jason, how's it going today?
Fine, great, thanks.
Today is World Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Day, and it falls in November. And November itself is Pancreatic Awareness, Cancer Awareness Month. And so for our webinar today, we wanted to look at what's happening in clinical trials for pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is a pretty difficult to treat cancer because it's not often found early. It's kind of asymptomatic. It can be resistant to a lot of traditional treatments. So it's really something where I was really surprised at the amount of interest in this webinar. We got a lot of questions from people to specifically go over today. So Jason, with that introduction, I just kind of want to turn it over to you, however you want to kind of start talking about clinical trials and pancreatic cancer and what's going on, then and we can jump into some of the specific questions, which I think will guide us through the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. And yeah, with it being Pancreatic Cancer Month, but Awareness Month, but also just pancreatic cancer itself is something that, as an oncologist, is near and dear to my heart, that I would love to see new drugs developed that can do better. There is standard of therapy, FOLFIRINOX, most patients will have at some point in time. Gemcitabine is another common agent used for pancreatic cancer. But when it's advanced or metastatic, there's really very little that can help beyond this standard. And patients oftentimes get to the end of the standard and they still feel healthy or well. There's also surgery, and we have a lot of patients asking us about Whipple surgery. We can get into that a little bit today. When is a Whipple surgery appropriate, when it is not appropriate, or when we might be able to make it appropriate. But the fact is that these are pretty old therapies, and so again, looking to try to welcome new therapies in and connect them to patients. And we have actually a good number of pancreatic cancer patients who we've been helping over the years. And when we get into some of the questions that we've been asked today, you'll hear some of the history of these patients and how we've been able to help to connect them to some very exciting therapies.
Excellent. So yeah, let's just jump right in and we can kind of see where we go. So one of the first questions I have here on the list is, this is someone who says, I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, so metastatic, and I am in radiological remission. Is there an treatment, like an immunotherapy treatment that's effective and available to someone in this position?
Yeah, absolutely. And immunotherapy has come about in the last, let's say, 15 or so years. And so many of these older therapies have not seen, and patients have not seen, some of the immunotherapies that are available today. A lot of them are available on clinical trials. And so I absolutely believe that immunotherapy is a new and unexplored avenue for pancreatic cancer patients that they should try to access. We'll talk about how to access that a little bit, because this patient mentioned that they are currently sort of in maintenance. They have no evidence of disease. Oftentimes that will happen after surgery because they've taken out the visible cancer. And we can show a little bit about what kind of cancer vaccines are available in the maintenance phase. But even before that, there are new therapies being tested to try to shrink the cancer. And in patients who either don't have surgery as an option immediately or have gone through standard of care and still have a tumor or multiple tumors, these immunotherapies are being tried on a daily basis to try to do better. And so we had a patient who actually came to us now several years ago, and it was a very interesting situation where we looked, as we do for all of our patients, for innovative therapies, and found really an unexplored innovative therapy. The name of the drug at the time was APX005M. I'll always remember it for a very good reason I'm about to show you, but it's still out there today being explored. And we found this, but there was no data behind it. So when I look back in preparation for today, just like what we offered to this patient, it was one of the several options that we put on the list, as we do with all of our patients. That being said, the patient sort of was, she was in New York, and this was a drug, a medicine that was being offered at Memorial Sloan Kettering, as it happens to be. Again, it also offered at other places, but she happened to be there. And so she got on it. And almost, within weeks, if not months, started to really see a reduction in the size of her tumor. Something that, again, in pancreatic cancer, we just don't hear that much about. And so was really excited for her to have her go through this. It was a bit tough. They were combining it with other chemotherapies, and this was a first trial, so I think they were learning how to dose it the correct way as well. But the fact is that she had at least 2 years of benefit from this drug and this combination on this trial. And when we saw the abstract, the results of the trial published, I wasn't surprised to see. Well, on one sense, I wasn't surprised knowing who she was and the fact that she was one of our patients on trial. I was surprised to see the overall results in all of the patients. And so let me just take a second here to show that to you.
Sure.
And I'm going to share my screen. And so this is the abstract for this trial. And again, here is that APX-005M. This came out in 2021 in Lancet, which is a great, very well-respected journal. And, there's a lot of writing here, but I'll focus in on the end of it, which is that out of these patients, the 24 patients that were treated on this trial, 14 of them, or 58%, had what we call significant responses, meaning their tumor shrank by at least 30%. That oftentimes then translates into a durable benefit for these patients. In our patients, again, about 2 years. And overall survival will likely increase as well. It's still early days. So, as I said, there are trials today ongoing. And matter of fact, we pulled one out for today. This is a trial using APX-005M in patients in combination with other immunotherapy agents. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how these all combine to do well for patients. But what's really exciting to me is that in addition to APX-005M, which was the first CD40 antibody and immunotherapy, there are now new ones coming down the pike. And, they have various different names. So, here's one that's called ABBV-927. As we go up, there's a Gen 1042. So again, we have the ability to focus in and look at these CD40 immunotherapies and see if we can get patients onto these trials or access to these innovative therapies. If we look at the map very quickly here, you can see that there's a good number spread across the U.S. And so, if you happen to live in the Northeast, as this patient did, there are multiple centers who are running trials today, and we can get patients to specific centers that have these trials, or they can find them themselves. But that's what we encourage. So it is, again, it is a very serious cancer, and yet there's great hope in some of the new therapies that are coming along.
So can I ask you, what is CD40?
Yeah, it's a good question. CD40 is one of the, and let me go back here and I'll stop my screen share. CD40 is one of the multiple proteins that's on the surface of either the tumor cell or the immune cell. And there are protein-protein interactions. So these cells kind of bump up against each other and are important to recognizing whether or not this belongs to the person and they shouldn't be attacked or not. Like if it's a virus or a bacteria or a virally infected cell. And so what we know is from some of the other immunotherapies, namely the PD-1, PD-L1, and I think we have another webinar about that, that that tumors can hide from the immune system by basically tricking these proteins into thinking that, oh, this is part of the normal body, I'm not going to attack it. When the therapy comes in and blocks that signal, which in this case is again directed against this protein called CD40, then all of a sudden that masking no longer can happen. Or the immune system now is actually driven to actually see the tumor and say, I need to get rid of that. That's not part of my normal self. And that's really the name of the game with immunotherapy and what everyone is trying to achieve by doing this.
So is CD40 something that all pancreatic cancer patients would have, or is it something you're tested to see if you have it, this might work better for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. From what I've seen, I believe that pancreatic cancer by and large produces the sorts of proteins that are hiding from the immune system through this mechanism. And so I haven't seen these trials try to isolate or otherwise specify a subset of pancreatic cancer patients to test. They're accepting basically patients who need treatment and don't have any of the standard therapies left for them. And so that's the situation for those. We'll talk about vaccines in a second. And in vaccines, it's very much not that way. And other innovative therapies like TCR or CAR T therapies, those are also immunotherapies, newer agents. We also have a review session about those. But in those, you need to have specific proteins expressed, and the tumor has to be tested for those proteins.
Gotcha. Okay, so going back for a second to the original question, which is someone who is in radiological remission and they're in a maintenance mode. Are there treatments that are available to them, or are they waiting for a recurrence? How should this patient think about that?
Yeah. And so again, let me just share my screen here and show you how we look at this. But the answer is yes. And here is a list of actually, let me switch here. So this is the list of vaccines that are available to patients with pancreatic cancer, as I mentioned, usually targeted in a specific way. KRAS, which we've had some patients asking about as well, is a very common gene that's altered in pancreatic cancer. And sometimes it's altered in a very specific way, and we'll talk about that in a second. But there are many, and I think that this is a list of about 83 or so medicines that are coming down the pike to try to do better for these patients. And again, in different ways and in different locations. So again, the general is that they've got a vaccine. A vaccine is really in a cancer world, it's similar to bacteria, but different. In the cancer world, a vaccine is being used to try to educate the immune system to attack a specific protein with the hopes that, with the knowledge that that protein or altered gene product is in the cancer and not in the rest of the body. So if we can succeed at doing that, then again, the immune system might find and attack the cancer and get rid of it. It's been tried for quite some time, and we haven't seen wonderful results out of vaccines, but now with those new other immunotherapy tools, they're being combined. So, I'm just picking one here at random, but this is a neoantigen, meaning a protein that's specifically on the tumor vaccine, combined with one of these anti-PD-1 antibodies, an immunotherapy that is geared to try to rev up the immune system. And so we don't know. Again, the idea is that when we can find the magic combination here, and I believe that we will one day, then we can really find a way of eradicating most of these tumors, and that would be a great day.
Great. So there's a lot in the tool belt, even in this situation, I guess I would say, and it's kind of like you're saying, there's a distribution of the trials kind of available. I want to get to some other questions, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
So someone who had a good question, which I think it will apply to a lot of people, which is the benefits and disadvantages of neoadjuvant treatment. So this person's mother is having chemo first because the tumor is currently inoperable. As the person points out, there's literature that suggests this is the best course of treatment in any event. and they're just asking, is this correct, or should they be pushing for surgery as soon as possible?
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's not an uncommon question, and it's completely logical, right? Everyone knows that surgery is really the best way to cure cancer today. And so if you're going after a cure, which most people would like, then surgery is the answer, but not always. And that's where it gets really complex. So let me try to help explain that in pancreatic cancer, there are situations that occur that we call borderline. They're not clearly very small tumors, which can just be kind of plucked out of the body and removed entirely, and they're not so large that people are like, nope, can't do anything with that. The surgeons. Instead, this is a borderline situation. It may be wrapped around a specific vessel, oftentimes in the head of the pancreas, and it goes through the pancreas. There could be multiple other situations that lead it towards being called borderline. For those patients, and it sounds very much like what this patient's family member has, is a borderline situation. In those patients, either chemotherapy or some of the newest therapies can be utilized to try to get that tumor to regress, to shrink. And as it does, it could unwind from that vessel or get to a size that's small enough then to be removed with the expectation of a much better outcome. And that's what doctors, scientists, pretty much everyone in the innovative space is trying for. And I highly recommend in those situations utilizing chemotherapy, but even better, if you can get on a clinical trial that is looking at these. And I'm going to show you in a second, because again, we have that in our system. And it's really exciting to see the efforts being made to try to do better for these patients. I will say that surgeons matter, and so you'll also want to be at a cancer center with a specific surgeon who does a lot of these. And when I say a lot, it may be once a week or more. It's not just a few times a year. And so that's also important. I don't want to leave that out because we've had a patient who was told they were inoperable until we got them to a world-class pancreatic cancer surgeon, and they're like, yeah, no, I can take that out. So again, that can happen, but I love the idea of pairing that surgeon with a neo-adjuvant, a perioperative or a preoperative regimen that can shrink that tumor, make the surgery easier, make the outcome better. And so let me just show you for a moment.
Yeah, as you're pulling that up, I mean, I just say, like, you want your surgeon to be in the best position possible to do the surgery. So that has to do with their experience doing the surgery and also the conditions of the tumor. So, if it can be shrunk and removed from kind of anything it's intertwined with, if there's kind of anything that the surgeon looks at and goes, that would be better for me, I'd have a higher chance of getting it all. I mean, that's kind of why I'd kind of say, you listen if the surgeon is saying that in some ways.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so again, there are multiple trials. This is a phase 3 trial, perioperative, meaning just before surgery, of chemotherapy beforehand versus having it afterwards to show that it's beneficial for pancreatic cancer patients. Sometimes there's different chemotherapies. This one has Abraxane or nab-paclitaxel. But again, there's radiation here as another example of things that can be done. Here now we start to move into some of the immunotherapies with nivolumab and looking at patients with borderline resectable. This is yet another one. And so again, there are so many of these. And again, I want to show the map because, I just want to give our viewers the knowledge that it really, these cover the U.S. So it almost, doesn't matter where exactly you live. You can likely find something that's close to you that has one of these treatments. And my, again, recommendation is to find these therapies, find these clinical trials. You can do that on clinicaltrials.gov or have someone help you to find them. PanCan is a great organization that helps patients to do this. We're also happy to help patients define these therapies.
Great. We have two questions that are focused on a particular mutation. So I might throw both of them at you. You can kind of decide how you want to take them. So one is just a general question: is are there clinical trials focusing on inhibitors for the KRAS G12R mutation? And then there's someone who has more of a specific situation, but again, it's this particular mutation, even more specific than that. So they're looking for trials for KRAS G12R, where their last CT showed was clear after the resection, meaning the surgery had been done. They've heard about vaccines, which we talked a little bit about. They said the oncologists won't look at trials. They tried to get a second opinion, but without a positive scan, they were turned down for a consultation. Is there a way they can enroll without a reference, which is a little bit of a logistical question. So let's focus first on the KRAS G12R and kind of what that is and why that might make a trial available.
Right, right. And as I mentioned before, KRAS is a very common gene that is in all of our bodies, but in a great proportion, I think it's about half of all pancreatic cancer patients will have an alteration in KRAS. Now that alteration will matter, and the G12 position, which is a glutamine, an amino acid in the 12th position, is frequently changed. And when we see that, we know that this is a pathologic change, that this is a change that's driving this tumor and causing it to grow. So there are a number of other letters that it can be changed to. G12D, G12V, there's a few of these as common examples. G12C, I've actually been seeing a lot of recently because there are new oral medicines being created that can specifically hit G12C, KRAS mutated pancreatic cancer. And so when I show you what we found in terms of our list, you'll see trials going for either patients who have tumors with the KRAS G12 something.
Let me pause you for 1 second.
Yeah.
I just want to address this right away. Is this idea of like how would a patient know if they have this? I mean, obviously the patient asking these questions know they must have had some tests. So let's just quickly talk about what this is and then go into
No,
that.
thanks, Jeremy, because it's important that when you have a high risk cancer, and from my perspective, all pancreatic cancers are high risk, you have something called next gen sequencing, genetic analysis of the tumor. If the tumor tissue is not available for whatever reason, it can also be done in the blood in something called circulating tumor DNA, and they can do that analysis. And by doing that, we can see the genes that are altered in the tumor and identify the KRAS, other mutations. And when you look, we see that, and it's been published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that 80% of patients will have a change that can be targeted or otherwise approached with innovative therapies. And so that is the basis for doing this. And I know that these patients have had at least a KRAS analysis. I do advise and recommend patients ask their physicians for an entire next-gen sequencing panel. There's hundreds of genes that are tested at the same time, as opposed to only looking at one. And almost all of our clients end up having those tests done. So that's a little bit of background. Does that answer the?
Yeah. So just from a patient would have this test done, a report would be produced. That report would list mutations in your tumor from the material they took, and so you might see on that list something like KRAS. And with like we're saying with pancreatic cancer, it's more common than other cancers. It's one of the more common ones to have when you have the sequencing of the tumor done. So that makes it very clear.
And there's other important ones as well that happen in pancreatic cancer, not maybe quite as commonly, but one of the ones that we talked about in a separate session was something called MSI high, also known as deficient MMR, mismatch repair. And so again, these will test for that situation. And if the patient has it, the prediction is that those immunotherapies are going to work much better in those patients. And so, and are already approved actually for being used there as a standard therapy. So it is really important to get the sequencing done. HER2 is another gene that is commonly in breast cancer, less common in pancreatic cancer, but it does happen. And when it does, it means that we can use all of those great drugs for breast cancer that work really well. We can use them in pancreatic cancer too. So again, this is something that has tremendous value across the board.
Great. So yeah, I'll let you continue. So if a patient knows that they have this KRAS mutation, kind of what is being done with that knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I mentioned, there are a number of therapies, and I'll just bring them up. But there's a number of therapies that either treat patients while they have tumors or treating them in the time period where their tumors are not visible. NED, no evidence of disease, these sorts of states. And so, let me share my screen again. And you can see here, let's see. So, so these are vaccines that are being utilized. This is one that I recognized, CRS 207. It's come out of Johns Hopkins. It's been there for quite some time. And again, these are looking for patients who have KRAS mutations because those are the proteins that are utilized and attacked. Again, they're being combined with other immunotherapies to try to do better. But what we do with this is and here's one for HER3, we mentioned HER2. As we go through these, we will pull out specific trials. And just in response to the patient's inquiry, I wanted to show that, this is a trial that was called DC vaccine in pancreatic cancer. It's not very descriptive. And that G12R is a less common G12 variant of KRAS. And so when I first looked, I didn't see a lot of trials. And I was like, wow, but we have ways of tagging these. And indeed, this is a trial that we'll show you is at University of Pennsylvania. But this is a vaccine. It's called a mature dendritic cell vaccine against mutated KRAS. And when you look specifically at what they're looking for, it's G12D, G12V, and here's the G12R, right? And so this is a trial that should be available to the patient. The one caveat is that they're also looking at the body's sort of normal, what's called HLA class genes. These are genes that are important for determining sort of who we are and how we respond to various bacterias. But again, this is a pretty open list. So they'll need some more testing to make sure that they qualify for this trial. But it's something that is available today. And, we can see that Dr. O'Hara is running the trial. And actually, some of these trials are kind enough to include a phone number. We verify because sometimes the data becomes outdated, as well as Dr. O'Hara's email address. And so again, making an appointment with Dr. O'Hara would be a way of finding out if this trial is the sort of trial that's right for that patient.
Yeah, I mean, just to answer the question they had about can they enroll, I mean, there is entry criteria. You must be screened by someone who is connected to the trial. So, but it is very possible to have that consultation done. You need to
Yeah.
register with the medical center and then call and try and make an appointment. Say you want to be, considered for the trial.
Right, right. Most insurances cover second opinions,
Yeah.
either with or without a referral. And oftentimes, if the patient, again, the doctor may not be open to clinical trials, they may not have clinical trials to offer, even if they are open to them. And so really it's incumbent, unfortunately, but it really is incumbent on the patient to be proactive, seek out these trials, find the physicians who are running them, make an appointment to see that physician. Once you have one, right, register at the center, make an appointment, tell your insurance company if they require a referral, then call your doctor back and say, hey, doc, I was looking at some of these clinical trials. I found one. I'm going to be meeting with Dr. O'Hara. Could you kindly give me a referral? I would be very surprised if the oncologist said no. I think that by and large they would say yes, and many insurances don't even need that. At the end of the day, if there was an issue, you could call the cancer center back and let them know. They may still be able to help you. And so again, there's lots of ways to logistically get onto these trials, but really it starts by meeting the doctor who's running them.
Great. The only other question I wanted to throw out there today is, and this is one where I know that I'm even conscious of us talking in this conversation about all the vocab that kind of gets thrown around and how kind of difficult this can be. Resection, meaning, can the surgery be done? Borderline is kind of it's all these terms, and so we got a question, and this is someone who this isn't pancreatic cancer, but one can be very sympathetic to kind of not knowing who else to talk to. So I want to bring up this other question. So someone says their mother-in-law has been diagnosed with ampullary cancer that has spread to the liver. They've done genomic testing, which is great, and they've tested positive for KRAS K61I mutation, I think. She's undergoing chemotherapy with gemcitabine. And so I think that this question here is kind of like, what should they know? What should they be considering at this point? And so could you talk to us a little bit about what ampullary cancer is and kind
Yeah.
of and how you might respond to that?
Absolutely. And in this sense, rarer tumors, and again, ampullary cancer is a fairly rare tumor. Um, there are oftentimes specific trials for those tumors. More often, there'll be group trials for, let's say, solid tumors. But the really cool thing is actually linking it to that genetic mutation. And the hypothesis that has been shown, again, if you have HER2 amplified breast cancer, then there are HER2 drugs that work there. If you have HER2 amplified pancreatic cancer, the same drugs work there. The same with BRAF and melanoma and colon cancer. And so really, to me, I'll explain that the ampulla of the body is where the pancreas has a duct that comes out of the pancreas and enters into the small intestine. It combines with the bile duct, where it's coming from the liver, collects the bile, and filters that into the small intestine. And the tip of that is called the ampulla. And so those cells can become cancerous, and then it's called ampullary cancer. Again, a pretty rare, unusual, cancer type. That being said, and it's very much treated similarly to pancreatic cancer, which is why I think the patient's on, and why the patient's relative is getting gemcitabine. That being said, again, it's that KRAS to me that's most important, and so I would, for that patient, seek out KRAS trials. Great if you can find one for that G12I. But again, even if not, KRAS itself can be targeted. And I think those would be the ones that I would try for in attempts to do better. And also making sure that, the full next-gen sequencing is done, because there may be other genes that are easier to target than KRAS. Right now, we're still learning how to target KRAS. But as I mentioned, HER2 or others like MSI high, those we know how to treat a little bit more easily, so have more drugs available today. So that's how I would handle that situation.
Yeah, the one thing I point out is you mentioned clinicaltrials.gov, and as a place that a patient can search, and it's difficult to navigate, and that's a big part of what we do is kind of make that more usable. But what I'd say in this situation is for people with more rare cancers, but you had genomic testing done, I mean, you're looking in this case for solid tumors. So you may not see ampullary cancer as in the title or even in the conditions, but if you see solid tumors, you are, unless you're in kind of having leukemia, I believe, and maybe some classification of lymphoma, but you probably have a solid tumor, and so that's going to qualify you, and that KRAS is really what you're looking for. So if you're kind of at a loss for trying to find a trial, start with the KRAS and recognize that it's a solid tumor and kind of go from there.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
And as I
Well,
say, we're here to help all patients. So if we didn't get to answer a question today, or you have additional questions, we're going to put up something on our website that people can ask, or just reach out to us at Sagely Health, and we'll do our best to answer and get you the help you need.
Excellent. Well, that's a great place to end it. Jason, thank you for the time today, and thank you everyone who submitted questions and joined us today. We will be posting this on the site probably within the coming days, and yeah, we look forward to doing more of these.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Take care, everyone.